I am a research fellow at the University of Edinburgh, but I have been working, it's very much I'm talking for the team today, so I work with Susie, who's my counterpart in Southampton, and she works alongside Ros Edwards, who's also at Southampton, and I work with Lynn Jimison, who's also at Edinburgh. So there's the four of us on this team, and it's part of the NCRM's in-house programme of research. And we have, like Clive, been grappling with multiple sets of qualitative data, but in our case, it's qualitative longitudinal data. And I think we'll try and not run away from this workshop and go and get WordStat and what was the other one? Wordsmith, yes, yeah, because they sound very, very appealing. Our project is very much in progress, so a lot of what I'm about to describe is work that we're actually kind of in the process of doing or planning. So we'll be very happy to come back in a year's time and give you a bit of an update on where we are at that later stage. So I'll give you a run through as to where we are with the project now. So the project name, we've never got a much snappier title for our project, really. Working across qualitative longitudinal studies, a feasibility study looking at care and intimacy. So although this is a project with principally a methodological aim, it does have a specific kind of theoretical focus. And that is to advance understandings of care and of intimacy within personal relationships. And in particular, we're kind of interested in how the quality of relationships varies across time. Time is very important to our project, age, stage, and circumstance. Now, to do this, we have brought together, we've kind of created a composite data set from archived data. And it was data that was archived through the Timescapes initiative, which, does anyone heard of some nods of heads? So it was an ESRC funded project. It was the kind of first of its kind in terms of doing qualitative longitudinal research. And it ran for 5 years, starting in 2007, Ros? About then. And I'm not going to go into the slide in huge amount of detail, but just to give you a bit of an overview of what the Timescapes data looked like. There were 7 main projects, and they all kind of differed in kind of, I guess, substantive focus, in method, in duration, but kind of united by an overall emphasis on relationships and identities, and looking at change and continuity in relationships and identities over the life course. And you'll see by just looking down there, the 7 projects each kind of focus on a different element of the life course. So going from kind of siblings and teenage relationships to motherhood, fatherhood, and then grandparenthood and the kind of oldest generation. So the data set, just to describe, this one is greyed out, number 2. We didn't manage to get access to that data, but we have the full set of materials for the other 6. So we're working with that data, which together encompasses about 165 what might be called cases, depending on your analytical kind of slant. So it's kind of sets of material, either relating to individuals or to kind of family units. And I think we've got over 1,000 individual files, as it were. Mainly text files, some visual files. We have only been working with the text files at the moment. I think the visual ones are something that we need to get our head around. And in terms of words, it's well in excess of a million words that we're working with in our project. So, like Clive's, obligatory photo of a bridge here. It's the Forth Road Bridge. We have a very large data set. And to approach this in a traditional qualitative way, i.e. by sitting down and reading it all, would take many, many months. So our approach, like Clive's, has been to look towards the kind of new computational techniques that are available for automatic text analysis. And I think a lot of times these are talked about in the context, especially in the kind of big data agenda, they're talked about in relation to the more quantitative data sets. But I think we definitely see that they've introduced new ways of thinking about and approaching qualitative data. So we were really keen to explore what these techniques might have to offer our project. And we've also seen these techniques kind of evolve as well. So moving away from just doing these word counts, how many three-letter words there are, or doing word frequencies, to far more sophisticated forms of data mining, using algorithms to look at kind of collocation and word proximities and such like, looking for meaningful themes and for concepts. And I think what we were struck at by looking at a lot of the texts which are using kind of automatic text analysis, a lot of them, and Clive's work is the exception, kind of sees the corpus analysis as the final unit, the end result, the outcome, and neglects the kind of case as an entity in itself. And what we wanted to do was kind of bridge this divide between what is perhaps seen as a more qualitative and quantitative approach, and look at how we could kind of bring together into conversation the breadth of analysis that you can get from corpus, from looking at corpus, and the kind of biographical depth that you get from a more conventional qualitative approach. So that was our kind of motivations. I thought it would be useful to, as I say, this is a methodological venture, but we needed to have some kind of theoretical focus to kind of guide our work. And we began by thinking broadly about care and intimacy. And we were kind of understanding intimacy as a kind of quality of a relationship, and care as a practice of intimacy. And because we thought timescapes, well, it looks at relationships over time. This is a great data set in which to kind of look at this topic. But our very initial, and I'll go on to this, our initial investigations, we quickly kind of realised that this was far too large a topic to be kind of examining, and we wanted to kind of narrow down our focus in terms of our kind of research question. We turned to this concept then of being there, which again our initial kind of investigations suggested that was something of interest in the data set. Julie Brownlee, an academic in Edinburgh, writes about the notion of being there, and she talks about it as being this often taken for granted supportive presence that we are for others and others are for us. So in other words, this being there is a kind of, it can be the practical kind of acts of support, but it can also be kind of forms of emotional support. But I think we found that it was just too abstract a concept to be looking for in a very large data set. So the focus that we've come to now is to look at a kind of more, I guess we were looking for a more sharply delimited relational event that we could locate in this really large data set. And we have chosen to look at arguments within personal relationships. So we want to find out what happens when you have an argument with someone that you're close to, and what are the range of ways that that might impact on your relationship, and what happens before, what happens afterwards, and kind of what are the possibilities for breach, recurrence and repair kind of over time, and how might that vary by age and stage and circumstance. So you'll see that most of what I'm about to describe is actually work that related to our very exploratory stuff, looking at kind of care and intimacy, and some of the work that we've kind of got planned for the future will be kind of drilling down to look at this topic of argument. So here's your slide, Clive. We have been using this metaphor drawn from kind of Clive's work originally of archaeology as a metaphor for the method that we are approaching. And we've just found this really incredibly helpful to kind of to help us think about the kind of different layers and levels of what is a very kind of large corpus material. Kind of, I guess, thinking about what lies underneath that surface. And it's also ensured that time is central, because actually even a lot of qualitative studies that we know, qualitative longitudinal studies, don't talk about time very much. So we really wanted to try and keep the time as central. And I think Clive's already probably described his work that he's done with Jonathan, but this is the kind of quote that we were interested in, likening keyword analysis to an aerial archaeologist and using that aerial picture to get a sense of the kind of landscape and the texture of the data. And then once these key passages are identified by keyword analysis, it then allows you to kind of dig down and do the kind of, get the analytical grip and do more of the analytical work that as qualitative researchers you might be more familiar with. So that was our kind of motivation, and this is our own kind of interpretation of our archaeological approach in 4 stages. So going from a surface survey to a geophysical survey and then shovel test pits. We're taking the archaeological metaphor to the max, and then kind of deep, and then deep kind of excavations. And I think critical to our thinking about this framework is that the kind of the corpus, this aerial view, wasn't just to be seen as a means of identifying the cases for further analysis. We wanted it to be a kind of iterative process where learning from one element is kind of constantly kind of feeding back and informing the other. So this is the intention. So the surface survey, basically we've kind of used this metaphor as a way of describing, from an archaeologist, I guess, they would be walking across the physical field and surveying the kind of breadth and nature of their plot that they're going to dig. We've got kind of the archive that we're kind of wanting to understand. And I don't know if this probably isn't necessary to see, but the work that we did in the surface survey was essentially about data cleaning, data managing, data organising. And even though the data that we had was actually prepared for archive, it really wasn't prepared to be pulled together into one composite data set. And it took us a very long time to tidy up this data. We did that organisation process in NVivo. Be useful to know from the audience whether you feel that was a good choice or not. And we mainly gathered the data around the projects, the 6 projects, but then we attached attributes as well to the data that we had. And these were attributes that were collected by the original researchers, which again is an important kind of thing in terms of what was the motivations of the original researchers in terms of what attributes they wanted to collect. So we had things like date of birth and gender, but they didn't collect social class, but there was kind of proxies that we could use for social class, like an employment type. So, and this kind of, I guess, this surface survey was just trying to help us understand this data landscape. So it helped us understand more about the aims of each of the 6 projects that we were looking at. Although they had a big overall aim, each had an individual kind of motivation. They had different research questions that they were asking. It enabled us to look at the kind of quality of the data and the quantity of the data, and crucially, any kind of gaps in the data. And also the kind of range of research tools that they used, because as we did this investigation, we realised there was a huge range of data types. So it wasn't just interviews, it was diaries, it was oral histories, there was field notes, so it kind of encompassed different styles and types of data forms. So from there, we have moved on to what we're calling this geophysical survey. And this is essentially our kind of initial endeavours in doing kind of corpus analysis. And our task there was to identify stories of care and of intimacy, but without penetrating the detail, without getting into the kind of reading of the data. Now, we began with a fairly simple approach to keyword analysis, and we used NVivo. And I guess the reason we started with NVivo was simply because we felt that the project was kind of speaking to qualitative researchers. And it's a piece of software that is the market leader, and even if researchers might not be using it themselves, it's probably the piece of software that they are most familiar with. So this is just a kind of an extract of some of the work that we did do. We started off by running just word frequencies, and these produce kind of long and very unwieldy lists of words and the counts of how often they were used. Here we've displayed them not by percentage but per 10,000, just because the percentages were so small. And we've just here is just an example where we're comparing the top 10 words that appeared in the data set overall and in the individual 6 projects. So we're seeing some words which, as Clive has kind of described, that have multiple meanings, like the word no. So when we started to look at that, it actually was quite often a function of the way that people spoke. So, you know, at the end, it was kind of an ending at the end of a sentence, or it was, I don't know. Whereas we were kind of interested in know as being something which is more about kind of understanding another or understanding oneself. So, I know how he feels. So that was quite a complex word. You know, even starting to do the word frequencies, we started to understand and recognise the kind of complexity of the language and how this is shaping our findings. And we also saw variations in the projects. So the one that's called TOG there is the oldest generation. And we found that that project just had a much greater vocabulary. It used far, far more words than the other projects, which is interesting in itself. But we also found that the word frequencies were shaped by the structure of the projects and by the research questions that were being asked. So the project about siblings and friends obviously had more common words relating to friendships, friends, sisters, brothers than the other projects. So I guess we then also we reviewed our word lists, and we were trying to think about ways of kind of homing in and generating, kind of narrowing in, I guess. So we generated a list of words that we felt might intimate care and intimacy. And we generated that by looking at participants' own words, but also kind of our own researchers' ideas of what care and intimacy might look like. And we kind of completed that exercise for the whole data set and for example cases. So we chose one case within each of the 6, and I'll come back to those cases at a later stage. We selected cases just simply by, we chose one person from each case who was born in the same decade, I think. I'm not sure what we ended up doing for siblings and friends because it was younger. But yeah. We'll have it noted. So we selected one case from each of the projects. And this is just an example again of the kind of top 10 intimacy and care keywords. And here kind of comparing all of the data to the case study that we've selected from the oldest generation. And you can see here the list of the top 10 is different from looking at the project overall. So you've got words like laugh and home and family becoming far more important. And from there, we also started to look at kind of keyword clusters as well. So trying to bring our long lists of words and narrowing in. So we created, this is just some examples, created kind of illness keywords to pull together all the data relating to illness. The other examples on finances, but we also did emotion words, so positive and negative emotions. And we also did proximity searches. And again, this is all in NVivo. So we looked at instances of care and intimacy words within specific distance of each other. So, for example, we looked at where family was talked about near responsibility or family near stress. And we also tried to investigate this word no as well. And I guess all this work took us to conclude what probably most of you already know is that NVivo is perhaps not designed for doing this kind of work. It's brilliant at managing data. It's very effective at doing that and organising your data. But its main weakness is in its inability to kind of automatically undertake analysis of kind of word proximities, for example. So our proximity searches were essentially based on the researchers' interpretation of what words we felt might likely have a relationship. Okay, no problem. So we have moved on to look at Leximancer. Is anyone using Leximancer in the room? No, so that's quite interesting. As I understand, not very many people are using it. It's an algorithm-based concept mapping tool that uses the collocation of words to generate and rank key concepts. And it maps the main concepts and then provides this kind of visual overview. Now, Susie is our resident expert in Leximancer, so you'll have to excuse me. If you have any specific questions, I'm sure we can fire them over to Susie. This is an example of a Leximancer concept map. It is very minimally tidied, this version, so we have taken out some common transcription words and anonymization codes. And then what you create is these kind of, these concepts essentially, and you'll see here, or themes rather. So they have themes and concepts, and the themes appear on this right-hand bar, and then you can get these extracts of kind of quotes essentially that are coming off of these themes. I don't know, what's our views on Leximancer thus far? We're still kind of working on whether it has been kind of valuable or enriching our data, I guess. And we're still trying to kind of make our way through the software. One of the things that we are kind of finding is, so I don't know if you can see that on this version, but these are all extracts from the interviewer who's talking about time as opposed to the interviewee. So we're finding examples of kind of bits of the data where it's creating concepts, but actually they've been driven by the interviewer using that word rather than the interviewee. So we've produced the same maps for each of our 6 projects. And we've kind of been exploring these to, I guess, get a sense of whether they are adding anything new to what we already knew. And we've moved on and we've looked at Leximancer, using arguments as well. So in a similar way to care and intimacy, we have created a list of argument keywords. And I don't know if you can see these, but we have kind of produced, again, in the same way that we created the care and intimacy words, and we produced some argument words. Now, argument wasn't a concept that Leximancer identified as an issue. We've identified that. So what we had to do is create a user-generated query in Leximancer. So we input all these words into Leximancer, and then again it produces these kind of concept maps. And it's been quite interesting. Just in this extract you can see argue comes alongside TV and watch. So there's kind of argument as being something which is happening in the kind of mundane, everyday kind of household. You're also seeing people in here as well. So mum and sister and brother are coming up. And things, arguing about kind of objects. So there is actually some quite interesting information that's coming from our more narrowed in focus on arguments. And what we're just about to do to kind of extend our corpus analysis even further is we've just commissioned a piece of work using R, which is a programming software. And what we're hoping R will do is kind of address some of what we felt have been the limitations of Leximancer, which is you dump all your data in Leximancer and it produces these maps. And you don't really get a sense of actually what's happening in between. Whereas R, you're actually coding it yourself and adding in the syntax, etc. So I can't tell you any more really about that. So that's one of the things we've just commissioned a kind of expert to do. So you're probably thinking, well, when are you actually going to look at the data? So the cases that I mentioned, we selected 6 cases and we did kind of corpus analysis on those. What we have done is we took those 6 cases and we kind of subjected them to multiple in-depth readings. And we were looking so we read them all in full, and we were looking for care and intimacy stories, for themes and recurring motifs. And then what we then did is we compared the results to the outputs that we had in NVivo. And what we were trying to determine, and I should say that the person who did the keyword analysis hadn't read the text, so we were kind of operating separately. So in the same way that you were saying read the 2 articles, we've kind of done this independent work and then compared. And what we were interested in understanding was the extent to which the keyword analysis could identify the same themes or similar themes, or themes that were surprising. We did find that it helped us identify segments of text for focus for more detailed analysis. But what we weren't able to do was identify events which were incredibly significant when we read the text, but actually related to very small keywords. So, example, in one case, the word cry was mentioned once, yet this was related to an incredibly significant event. So how would a keyword analysis kind of pick up that really important and significant event, which then had a bearing on this man's life? And we also found that the temporal was largely absent as well, because people talk about their lives in the current tense. So that kind of past, present, future was really quite difficult to grapple with and get hold of in the keyword analysis. So we do plan to repeat this process, and we haven't done that yet. We're going to repeat the process for arguments again, just to see if we can, by narrowing our focus, get a more kind of interesting result, or a kind of more useful result. And I'm on the final slide. And what we've also been able to do using our Leximancer analysis is use those outputs to identify cases for further analysis for our argument work. We were able to identify specific examples where arguments happened, but we were also able to identify cases where they weren't talking about arguments generically, but were talking about a specific argument. So we are treating the argument as the case, as it were, and we're then going to read these cases and try and follow the argument over time. And we were able to identify from Leximancer different types of arguments, so whether it's arguments with friends, arguments with parents. And then we've also used the attributes that the original research team collected as a way to kind of help us with our sampling as well. So that work is yet to be completed. I guess our next steps, well, where are we going with research, this project? We will continue to investigate other forms of software, and we may well look at WordStat and Wordsmith. We still have another kind of year and a half on the project. We have a website as well, which I think is there, but you've also got a leaflet. We would love people, if you're working with qualitative longitudinal research or complex qualitative data and dealing with analysis, we have a slot for kind of guest bloggers on our site. So if you'd like to write anything for us, we would very welcome you to get in touch, and we'd be happy to talk about publishing your work. And we'd love people to kind of stay in touch. We also post kind of our research team blogs to kind of document what we're doing in our investigations. So I hope that was useful. It's, as I say, very exploratory and very much a work in progress. So you can stay with us and follow our blog, and hopefully you'll join us in the learning as we go. Thank you.